Hey guys, what's happening? Thanks for tuning in, coming back and watching. I appreciate it. Hope your day is going super awesome. And today I'm going to talk about a topic that I got to admit, I have had so many requests for this topic over the really over the last couple of years. I've had questions about it. Jim, can you do this in Luminar? I'm in Luminar today. I'm in Luminar Flex, but it's the same in Luminar 3 or Luminar 2018. It's all the same. But I've had so many questions about this. Jim, can you do this? How do you do it? That sort of thing. So I'm going to talk about it. And the topic, as you probably saw from the title of the video, is exposure blending in Luminar. So a couple of things I want to be clear about. This is a very simple, straightforward sort of thing. This is not a highly complicated tutorial. This is not the same kind of exposure blending necessarily that you would do in Photoshop, for example, where you might have luminosity masks and do a lot of different things. This is basically taking two exposures and taking the best parts of each exposure and blending them together in Luminar. Another caveat is Luminar, when you add a new image layer, which is what I'll be doing in a moment, Luminar does not have a tool or a mechanism by which you can align the photos perfectly. So in other words, if they were not shot on a tripod, if you shoot them handheld, it's unlikely they're going to be perfectly lined up. So I highly recommend doing this if you've shot the images on a tripod. If you're not familiar with what exposure blending is, you can read about it all over the website. Not my website, all over the web. Millions of photographers, millions, maybe that's an overstatement. Lots of people have done videos about it. And here's how you do it in Photoshop. Here's how you do it in On One. Here's how you do it in whatever. Well, here's how you do it in Luminar. And so what is it, right? It's basically, as the name implies, you're blending two exposures to get a better exposure. So why do people do that? Well, I just said it, which is to get a better exposure. What that really means is most people, by the way, are doing this like with landscape photographs. It's very popular in that regard. And what they do is if you expose your first photograph, if you take a photograph of a landscape and you expose for the sky is going to be perfectly exposed. You're going to get all these nice colors at sunset. But because the light's kind of darker, the foreground, which doesn't have as much light on it, is going to be dark. So you're going to have a perfectly exposed, upper part of the photo, let's say the upper half, because the sky's going to look great and you expose for that, but the bottom half is going to be dark and maybe too dark to be usable. So the alternative to that is people expose for the foreground, so they get that nice rich color and the nice distribution of light across the foreground, which would be the ground, let's say, in a landscape. But when you do that, the sky, what's going to happen with that? The sky is going to be blown out, right? So the sky is going to be too bright. So people will typically take two exposures. Landscape photographers do this all the time. They'll take two exposures, maybe more, and they'll say, all right, I'm going to use two in this example. I'm going to take one for the sky, and I'm going to take one for the ground, and then I'm going to basically use a brush mask, blend them together, and voila, there's my perfectly exposed photo. So that's an exposure blend. Now, there's another kind of exposure blend which you've probably heard me talk about and seen gobs of videos about, and that's called HDR. It is an exposure blending method where you're taking bracketed photos, it blends them together automatically in Aurora, but it does apply tone mapping, and that's why landscape photographers often will prefer to do an exposure blend instead of an HDR because of the tone mapping. A lot of people do not like the look of tone mapping on their images. They think it's, fake or too HDR, too over the top or whatever. And despite my feeling, which is that you can make those over the top HDRs, sure. You can also make HDRs that are really natural looking in Aurora HDR in particular. There are a lot of people that won't do it because HDR sometimes has a reputation of being over the top. So exposure blending, let me show you a couple of photos that I'm going to walk through real quick. Here we go. So here's a shot in Venice, and I'm going to be clear. I do not go out with the intent to shoot exposure blended photos. I do go out and often shoot brackets. And so at least in two of these situations of these three photos I'm going to show you, two of them are just excerpts from the bracketed set where I got a dark one and a bright one, and I'm going to stick them together. This first photo is that example. So this one, the sky looks pretty nice. It was mid-afternoon in Venice, but the foreground, including all the buildings, is too dark, right? The sky looks good, building's too dark. Here's one of the images from the bracketed set. The buildings look great, well exposed, but the sky is blown out. I'll show you how I blend those. Here's a different example. This is a long exposure in Venice. And I really like the foreground here with the multiple light trails of the boats, including this boat over here that's blurred out because it's passing. But I don't like this. This was a cruise ship that went by, this long exposure. I don't really like that. So I've got another long exposure where I don't really like the foreground, but I like the sky and the buildings better. So I'm going to blend that one. And then I've got a sunset in Oregon, a series from a bracketed set. In this one, I like the sky, nice rich color. I like kind of the tones there. But let me go back. The foreground's too dark. In this one, another exposure from the bracketed set. The foreground looks a lot better, a little bit too bright, but the sky's too bright for sure. So I'm going to blend those. So how do you do that? You get one of your two photos. It doesn't matter really which one. In this case, I'm taking the dark one on the bottom, and I'm going to say add new image layer, and I go and grab the brighter one and add that as a new layer. Then I get the brush, and I just come over here, and I've got the brush at a pretty big size, and all you do is you start brush masking this into the photo where you want the brighter parts to go. So you can kind of see I'm doing that just on the buildings. And the thing is you can adjust the opacity. You see that opacity is 100. I'm going to take it down to about, let's say 50, and I'm going to shrink my brush. And I'm going to do a 50 over here kind of on these boats and on this brickwork. And I'm going to do 50 on that reflection there as well and kind of lighten that a little bit. And there you go. That's really a blended exposure. Here, let me show you the before. That's a dark one with the nice sky. That's the blended one where I took the best parts of one image and blended it into another. Now the next step would be to stylize it and do whatever you want. And so in this case, I would add a new adjustment layer. And for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to go get one of my presets from my old preset pack, A Movable Feast, and just stick it on top. And that's kind of a warm golden glow kind of look. You might actually take that down a little bit. I might take the opacity down. Maybe the color's a little too rich. But there you go. I added that layer and blended the exposures, put a preset on it to make it a nice sunset looking kind of image versus that. And that's really it. That's literally how you do it. I'm going to show you two more quick examples. Once again, I've got the image that I have for the foreground here. I like that. I'm going to add a new image layer. I'm going to go get this other one that has the darker sky that I like a little bit better, but it didn't have that boat in it. And once again, I'm going to grab the brush, and my brush mask is pretty big, so I'm just going to brush this in. Now, if I liked that boat, I could leave that. You see how I'm brushing this in. By the way, let me show you the mask. I could have showed you that on the last one, and I forgot. Sorry. But here, I'm blending that in. And so if you like that little boat, or not little boat, it's a cruise ship. If you like that cruise ship going by, then leave it. Just don't mask that part. But I kind of don't like it, so I'm just going to mask over that and get rid of it. Now you can see my mask covers those areas, leaves the nice long exposure light trails there in the foreground where I like them. And then once again, I would add a new adjustment layer. And again, this is not an editing tutorial, so I'm going to grab this. I'm in that same preset pack, A Movable Feast. I'm just going to stick this lovely Day for a Stroll preset on there, make some adjustments to it. It's probably a little bit colorful, but that's the point. I took the best parts of the two exposures that I had. Here's my original, and here's my final. I basically put a new top on the existing bottom. And again, you may not like the colors. It's probably a little bit saturated. You can fix that easy like that. Anyway, that's how you do it. And I'm going to show you one more. I want to show you the sunset here. So in this case, I've got the foreground that I like. Again, pretty bright. In fact, a little bit too bright, which I'm going to fix without a preset this time. But the sky is blown out. So once again, I'm going to add a new image layer. And I'm going to go get the darker sky. And there it is. So now, you don't have to apply it with the brush mask. In this case, I'm going to apply it with the gradient mask. So I'm just going to grab the gradient mask, and I'm going to click and drag that sky on top and say done. Now, very uneven looking, as you can tell, right? The previous sky is too blown out. Honestly, they're savable probably, but this is part of the demo. So just go humor me here. But anyway, there we go. The dark sky now is a little too dark. So again, I'm going to add a new adjustment layer, but I'm just going to add some filters. I'm going to start with adjustable gradient, and I'm going to go to the bottom. If I can close that filter catalog, I'm going to go to bottom. And if you didn't see my recent deep dive on adjustable gradient, you can check that out there. That'll help you get to grips with this filter. But I'm going to drop the exposure of the bottom, and in fact, I'm going to increase it a little bit on the top. That looks more balanced to me, considering we came from that to that. I think that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to add a tiny bit of contrast in the top, add a little vibrance, cool it off a little bit, and I'm going to do the same in the bottom. A little bit of contrast, a little bit of vibrance, maybe cool it off a little bit, maybe a little more vibrance and contrast, maybe a slight more dip in exposure, and then maybe I'll add something like, let's say golden hour. Oops, not fog. Let me get golden hour. Here we go. Let me close the fog filter. Don't want that. But golden hour gives it a nice warm pop, maybe a little saturation. That's a little highly saturated. The point is, I was able to quickly blend two exposures from a bracket set, darker sky, brighter foreground, stick them together, and then add a new layer, adjustable gradient, to fix the both the exposures in the top and the bottom, as well as add vibrance and temperature adjustments, and then a golden hour adjustment, which was global in scope. And that took me from that base image, a little too bright, but I like the foreground, where I added the darker top, which I'll just turn this off. There's the darker top. And then I stuck an adjustment layer, and with two filters, adjustable gradient and golden hour, boom, I think I have a beautiful photo. Now, your opinion may vary. You may not think it's beautiful, and that's fine. But that's how you do blended exposures. If you look at the befores and afters, you can see we came a long way in really just a couple of minutes, and the same on this one, right? So just a couple of minutes, we went from that base layer to this finished photo. And also on the Venice one, I like this one quite a bit. I think in a couple of minutes, we went from a fairly dark foreground, except for the streak of light that's reflected in the canal, and fairly dark on the walls, decently exposed sky, to a much better looking finished product, which was a new adjustment layer with a preset on it. So that's how you do blended exposures. Is Luminar Photoshop? No. Can you do more in Photoshop? Yes. The brush mask in Photoshop is more advanced. So if you're having complicated selections and you're trying to mask things in, can you do it in Luminar? Probably, but the brush is not edge aware in Luminar. So you have some challenges like that. You do need to make sure that your images will align perfectly, which is why I recommend shooting them on a tripod. But that's how you do a simple blended exposure. And truthfully, you can shoot brackets, as I've done here in a couple of these 3 photos, and been able to put together a nicely exposed photo based on 2 exposures from a bracketed set of 3. I just toss out the middle one, get the dark one, get the bright one, stick them together in this method. It works great. So super easy, super powerful. You have lots of control. Again, I'm just trying to clarify for the people that are Photoshop enthusiasts or Photoshop purists. It's not the same. I'm not trying to say that it is, but you can do a lot with Luminar, and that is how you do an exposure blend in a simple way to get a simple exposure blend, which you can then go enhance and stylize with all the other wonderful capabilities that you do have in Luminar. That's it, my friends. I hope this answers the questions that I've been getting for a long time, honestly, and I'm really delinquent in doing this video, but I hope it helps. Hope it hits the spot that you needed to scratch. That was dumb. Anyway, I hope it helps, and I hope you got something out of it. Please leave me a comment, share with your friends, and invite other people to check out my channel for more editing tutorials, tips, tricks, and some fun vlogs as well. That's it, my friends. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. I'll see you soon. Take care, and adios.